Story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is finally reaching its climax. It's the final Makkah, Makas Bechoros. It's going to break the Egyptians. Bnei Yisrael are going to be free to worship God. It's going to be the greatest moment in the creation of Am Yisrael, a lofty spiritual one. And then it comes to an abrupt halt. Suddenly Hashem interjects, the Jews have to go and they have to get the gold and the silver and all the precious things from the Egyptians. Why? Is wealth so important? At this sublime moment, is that what they should be thinking about? Yes, Hashem made a promise to Avraham Avinu, Acharei chen yetzu b'rechush gadol, that at the end of the bondage, your children will go out with great wealth. But right now, does it really have to be such an important part of the mission that is taking place? And many of the Mefarshim grapple with this difficulty. But I want to focus on one subtle point that I think brings an important perspective to the whole episode and to each and every one of us to think about over Shabbos. The pasuk here says in Perek Aleph, pasuk Beis, Daber nod ba'oznei ha'am, should speak to the people. V'yishalu ish me'esrei eyu v'yisha me'esrei usa klei chesef u'klei zahav, and go and speak to your friends for their gold and their silver vessels. Friends? Which of the Jews have friends in Egypt? If it would simply ask your neighbor, your local Egyptian, gold and silver, I understand. But why does the Torah say friends? And in fact, earlier in the Torah, in Perek Gimel Pasuk Chav Beis, when it describes and Hashem tells Moshe what will happen as we reach the end of the redemption, it does say, V'sha'ala isha mishchento migaras beiso, that each woman will ask from her neighbor for those who live nearby, for the gold and for the silver. So that I understand. But friends, why change the language? One of the three makos that we read about in this parsha, Kiminyan Bo, Beis Aleph, 3 makos, is choshech, darkness. And the Torah makes it clear, and the Mefarshim explain at length, that the darkness that we're talking about is not an absence of light. There was mamashos, there was substance to it. And if for 3 days, if somebody was standing, they couldn't move. If they were sitting, they couldn't move. They were stuck in their position. So think about an easy, obvious question. So what do they eat and drink? How do they survive? 3 days is a long time to be without food and water. And the Egyptians were just stuck. How could they move? If without moving, how could they survive? And then Netziv explains beautifully. He says they ate and they drank and that's how they survived. But how? They couldn't move. Well, there were some people who could move. The Torah says, L'chol b'nei Yisrael hayaor b'moshvosam. The Jews had light. The Jews were able to move. And the Jews brought food and drink to the starving Egyptians. They saw them suffering and they couldn't bear to see human beings suffering. And they gave them food and drink. This, the Netziv explains, the difference in the psukim. At the point when Hashem relates what will happen in the future to Moshe, the relationship between the Jews and the Egyptians was nothing more than neighbors. Shchenta, garas beisah. But that changed after Choshech, when the Egyptians saw the greatness of the Jew, the greatness of these people, the Jews. They saw their enemies suffering and they didn't just sit back and watch and enjoy. They didn't even ignore. But they lent a helping hand. They realized that the Jews were in fact people who could be their friends. And therefore they would in fact give their friends not just their neighbors, their gold, their silver, and their riches. And with this, perhaps the significance of this episode is not merely that practically Bnei Yisrael should have the wealth because Hashem promised it to Avraham Avinu. Yes, that would have been important. But it didn't have to be such a large focus. What the Torah, though, is pointing out is that at this moment when they are leaving and they're being transformed from slaves to Bnei Choron to free people, they easily could have looked upon their enemy, the average Mitzi, as someone from whom to take revenge and treat as subhuman. But not Bnei Yisrael. No. They emerged a more mature people. The ones who could do a chesed even to the nation who enslaved them. And ultimately that fulfills the goal of Yetzias Mitzrayim even more. They became the people that they needed to be. They worked, they could see the greatness of God, the shining example of his chosen people for the entire world to see. You know, sometimes chesed for friends is easy to do, or easier to do. But doing chesed for someone that we don't know, or maybe even for somebody who has hurt us in the past, is much harder. Why should I do it for him? Why should I do it for her? He would never do that for me. So maybe you're right. Don't do it for him. The Torah is teaching us here is do it for you. Do it because that's what a Jew needs to be. That's how we grow. That's how we emerge as the great people Hashem wants us to be.